On April 1st, Israel is believed to have launched an attack on the Iranian consulate in Syria, an event that marked a massive escalation of tensions between the two countries. Iran lost one of its leading soldiers, Brigadier General Mohammad Reza Zahedi, in the attack, along with several commanders from its Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Iran didn't take the attack lying down. Approximately 2 weeks later, Iran launched a terrifying combined missile and drone strike against Israel. Around 300 aerial threats were sent into the skies, targeting several Israeli locations, but most were shot down before they could do any real damage. But Israel wasn't alone in defending itself against the Iranian threat. As the U.S. Department of Defense highlighted in an April 16 press release, it also took part in the defensive operation. Its Central Command forces, supported by destroyers the USS Karni and USS Ali, destroyed over 80 of the drones Iran launched, along with around 6 ballistic missiles. In doing so, the US may have played into Iran's hands. Following the attack, the prospect of war between Iran and the United States is higher than it's been in years. And in this video, we're going to theorize one way the war might happen, hour by hour and month by month. Hour 1. Deeper within the Sadabad complex, Iran's president, Ibrahim Raisi, feels as if he's starting to see his plans come to fruition. Mere days ago, he baited the United States into destroying some of its missiles and drones. Yes, that aerial assault targeted Israel, and he'd hoped to cause some damage against one of his greatest enemies in the Middle East. But his real goal was to tempt the United States into responding to his strike. Now he has justification for what he's planned. Raisi has spent over a decade cultivating relationships with Islamic insurgent groups throughout Asia. Hamas in Gaza, the Houthis in Yemen, even Hezbollah in Lebanon. All are on his payroll, receiving funds and equipment to carry out their attacks, and what Raisi provides allows him to use these smaller groups as proxies for his geopolitical goals while keeping his own hands relatively clean. But more important to him are the resources his ties to those groups provide. Not only can Raisi attack his enemies with these proxies while maintaining some level of deniability, but he can rely on them to insert combatants into countries he'd otherwise be unable to reach. Countries like the United States. Over several years, Raisi and his proxies have been sending agents into the United States. Some have been caught, but far more have managed to establish themselves as citizens of the country. They've just been waiting for their call to attack. Raisi provides it, but the attack doesn't come in the traditional military sense. There will be no fighting between Raisi's insurgents and the United States military. Instead, each will become a martyr, targeting locations throughout the United States where large numbers of people gather to wreak havoc and sow the seeds of terror in the country. Concerts, sporting events, malls, they're all targeted with synchronized attacks that result in the deaths of tens of thousands of civilians, primarily the victims of suicide bombings or gunfire. At the same time, Iran attacks American interests closer to home. Missiles fly over the Strait of Hormuz, through which 33,000 ships, including American oil tankers, sail every year. The attack is devastating, destroying several oil tankers and cargo ships, though Raisi isn't able to take out the USS Bataan or the USS Carter Hall, both of which have been stationed in or near the strait since August 2023. That doesn't matter, he's happy to engage both in a naval battle after the fact. What mattered most was the statement. Ibrahim Raisi has just declared war on the United States. Hour 2. President Joe Biden and his most trusted advisors are scrambling. Over the last hour, they've received words of dozens of attacks on American soil, along with news of missiles targeting American commercial and oil vessels in the Strait of Hormuz. This is no coincidence. Intelligence briefings in the immediate aftermath of the attacks confirm what Biden already feared. All of the attacks can be linked to Iran. As data continues to flow in, the names of those who killed civilians on American soil and the nature of the missiles flying over the Strait of Hormuz, Biden comes to terms with the fact that the US is now at war. More is coming. Hour 3. Raisi doesn't take much time to relish in the success of his initial attacks. He needs to do all he can to prevent a hasty American response, which means turning his focus toward the country's regional allies, the United Arab Emirates, or UAE, and Saudi Arabia. Cyber warfare is the next step. According to America's own Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency's assessments, Iran represents a major cybersecurity threat to the rest of the world, primarily because of its willingness to conduct aggressive operations. State-sponsored malware and ransomware attacks are already common, but what Raisi has planned now will surpass anything Iran has done before. His crack team of computer experts has spent the last year infecting specific targets in Saudi Arabia and the UAE with a spin-off of the Menorah spying malware. Through that malware, Iran has established communication with several command and control servers on home soil, through which it compromises the infected systems to damage them at critical junctures. That malware's executables are running on overdrive today. Raisi's computer experts target the Al Dhafra Air Base, host to 5,000 American military personnel, just outside Abu Dhabi, shutting the base's communications and computer equipment down temporarily. The 10 bases the US has in Saudi Arabia are targeted with similar attacks, all designed to hamper communications and slow down the US response. However, Raisi doesn't send his troops into either country. To do so would be suicidal, as he doesn't have the resources to fight the Saudi and UAE militaries on top of fighting against the United States. He just wants to make his threat known. These attacks are his bargaining chip, one he's using to cow the United States into relinquishing the tightness of its grasp over Middle Eastern politics. Now all he has to do is sit back, bide his time, and wait for the American response. Hour 24. In the United States, President Biden has spent the last day working with his advisors to prepare America's counter to Iranian aggression. Normally, he'd rely on sanctions to force Iran to back down. It's a tactic that the US has used successfully in the past, and it has sanctions active now, but Biden knows that won't be enough this time. Nevertheless, his team has quickly drafted a new round of sanctions, primarily targeted at Iran's ability to export oil to other countries. If the US were able to put a dent in the 1.29 million barrels of oil Iran exports daily, it could hit Raisi in his pocket. That's unlikely to happen. Most of those barrels go to China, an Iranian ally, but even so, Biden implements the sanctions, and his partners in NATO follow suit. A little financial damage is better than none at all. More important will be his response to Iran's attacks in the Strait of Hormuz. After all, he knows that Raisi can't send his military onto American soil, so the US will have to engage him closer to home to show that it's simply not lying down and allowing the attacks to happen. Furthermore, he can't allow Iran to have control over that passage of water. Too much cargo and oil that's valuable to the United States passes through. He has to control it as quickly as possible, both to hurt Iran and protect America's interests. The USS Bataan and the USS Carter Hall are both on alert and have orders to attack any Iranian naval vessels they find. Biden also seeks help from the Combined Task Force, or CTF-150, a multinational force that includes ships from France, Germany, and the UK, to help him start the fighting early in the strait. That force contributes almost 15 ships, though Pakistan withdraws in an effort to stay neutral and will help Biden conduct a tit-for-tat naval battle in the strait and throughout the Persian Gulf until a stronger naval fleet arrives from the United States. With those early measures in place, Biden has to turn his focus to his own people. America was attacked on its own soil in multiple locations by terrorists who he now knows were funded and supported by Iran. Not only must he bring solace to a damaged nation, but he must prepare it for war. Week 1. As several American warships, in addition to 2 of its aircraft carriers, make the journey toward the Persian Gulf, Biden has been preparing for the next stage of his offensive. It'll take between 4 and 6 weeks for his ships to reach the Strait of Hormuz, which is why it's so crucial for CTF-150 to do its job now. Once they arrive, he'll institute a blockade, giving America control of the ships that sail through the strait, in addition to allowing him to position his aircraft carriers so that he can launch aerial assaults on Iran. America's Navy will be key to its victory, with 472 ships compared to Iran's 101, including 11 aircraft carriers to 0 for Iran and 45 more submarines. America knows it can come out on top in the Persian Gulf. Besides a handful of corvettes and frigates to support its 19 submarines, Iran's navy is mostly made up of patrol vessels. That will play against Raisi in the long term, as Iran will be able to do little to prevent America from taking the Persian Gulf and setting up blockades, but that will come in time. For now, Biden has to rely on the smattering of bases the US has set up near Iran. The country's bases in the UAE and Saudi Arabia are back up and running, giving Biden thousands of troops he could send to storm Iran. But he doesn't send that order. Instead, those troops are prepared to move to the coast lining the Saudi and UAE sides of the Persian Gulf. Once the US controls that stretch of water, it'll establish a through line using Saudi Arabia, through which it will funnel troops to transports in the Persian Gulf to ship them into Iran. America's alliance with Israel will also pay dividends. Iran's war with the US was triggered because of an attack on Israel. Now that America has officially entered the fray, Israel is more confident in its ability to directly declare war against Iran. It has backup. It's not going to fight alone. And now that Iran has launched such devastating and public attacks on the United States, popular support has started to lean in Israel's favor. So, as the UAE and Saudi Arabia provide the US with inroads into Iran via the Persian Gulf, Biden also sends ships and troops sailing through the Mediterranean to reach Israel. From there, America can launch aerial attacks and perhaps even send ships via the Red Sea into the Arabian Sea to cut off any support others might send to Iran. All in good time. For now, Biden simply has to wait for his navy to arrive. Week 2. The tit-for-tat fighting in the Persian Gulf and particularly the Strait of Hormuz hasn't been going in Iran's favor. But it's not all bad news for Raisi. One of his submarines managed to sink the USS Carter Hall, taking out the small ferry-class dockship. But Raisi knows America's navy is coming and he needs to do as much damage as he can, as fast as he can. That means turning to Iran's huge stockpile of missiles. According to Iran Watch, the country has around 3,000 ballistic missiles stockpiled, notwithstanding a growing collection of land attack cruise missiles. The country has also developed solid propellant missiles, allowing for faster firing and acceleration, and it's those missiles that'll be turned against the few American ships in the Persian Gulf right now. Khyber-Shakhan and Emad missiles are fired from silos on the Iranian mainland, capable of traveling 900 miles and 1,056 miles respectively. Those missiles can easily reach the American ships in the Gulf. They're backed by Shahab-3 missiles, which can travel 808 miles, as Iran launches a battery against the American ships. But Raisi doesn't stop there. Dozens of the Shahed-136 drones are sent over the Persian Gulf. These drones, which are the same as those Raisi used to attack Israel mere weeks ago, carry a small explosive payload that detonates upon impact with a target. They may not be strong enough alone to take out the USS Bataan, but when combined with the missile volley coming out of the country, that ship's anti-air defenses are soon overwhelmed. It sinks. And with further missile attacks coming, the dozen or so ships that are part of CTF-150 choose to withdraw to a safe distance. They've done their jobs. But now that Iran has shown a willingness to send missiles into what was previously a naval battle, they'll sit out until reinforcements arrive from the United States. Week 3. Raisi's plans have worked so far. He's retaken the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz, even though he can only protect those waterways with patrol boats and a small fleet of submarines. That doesn't matter. He knows the US will take them both back when their full fleet arrives. What he's not so concerned about is whether the US will try a full land invasion once it secures the Persian Gulf. That would be unwise. Iran is the 18th largest country in the world in terms of pure land mass, and its geography makes trying to invade a treacherous prospect. The US can't enter from the east. That would mean going through Afghanistan, which the US recently exited, and essentially starting a second war. Add 2 deserts into the mix, and American troops will be ripe for the picking if they came from the east. A Western invasion is more possible thanks to America managing to convince Saudi Arabia and the UAE to allow it to use bases in those 2 countries to home in on the Persian Gulf. But the Zagros Mountains, which line much of Iran's western borders, means an incursion wouldn't be simple. If America wanted to land troops into the country, it would likely need to do so via the same water pass Saddam Hussein used when Iraq invaded Iran in the 1980s. But even that isn't a surefire thing. The invading forces would still run up against the Zagros Mountains, and that's after negotiating the swampy terrain in the southwest where the Tigris and Euphrates intertwine. Raisi believes his country is a fortress. With the Persian Gulf temporarily secured, he focuses on coordinating more terror attacks. Iran's proxies are being weeded out in the United States, but enough evade the authorities long enough to commit more bombings and shootings. Raisi knows those insurgents are a finite resource. With the US imposing strict restrictions on travel, it's unlikely that Iran will be able to sneak many more of its fighters into the country. But that's okay too. Those who are already there have done their jobs. The American people are panicking. They don't know where the next attack will come from. And Raisi feels that helping to build this panic could soon sap the country's appetite for war. Weeks 4 to 6. Biden has re-evaluated his plans slightly as his naval forces arrive to the Persian Gulf. Though he'll still send thousands of troops to supplement the military bases America has bordering the Gulf, those troops won't invade directly. That would just lead to more bloodshed than he believes is necessary, with thousands of Americans likely to be killed as they filter into Iran from the southwest. Instead, he'll send troops into Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE, a constant presence to keep Iran on edge. The US chooses to respond to Iran's missile volleys in kind. As its ships arrive in the Persian Gulf, they set about the task of clearing the waterways of the patrol boats Iran has patrolling. The country's few corvettes and frigates are easy targets for America's destroyers, with the arrival of a small fleet of submarines proving more than a match for Iran's own fleet. Now in position, those ships prepare to fire missiles at select targets on the Iranian mainland. But they won't be the only form of attack the US leverages. Accompanying the fleet that takes the Persian Gulf are 2 aircraft carriers, the USS George H.W. Bush and the USS Gerald R. Ford. The latter carries over 75 aircraft, with the former carrying 60, and they'll be used to bring America's air superiority to bear. F-18 Super Hornets will make up the main attack force, backed up by Northrop Grumman E-2 Hawkeyes that will be responsible for conducting reconnaissance and helping the Super Hornets find targets on the Iranian mainland. When Iran inevitably sends its own jets into battle, Lockheed Martin F-35C Lightning fighter jets will engage Iran's fighters over the Persian Gulf. The goal is simple: attack from the water, using missiles fired from ships and America's huge fleet of jets to cow Iran into submission quickly. Week 7. Raisi expected all of this. He knows that Iran can't match the United States in terms of pure firepower. Its stock of 121 combat-ready fighter jets, along with 15 attack-type planes, will be overwhelmed by those flying from America's air carriers. If the US brings more carriers to the Persian Gulf, they'll gain full air superiority. But Raisi is far from being out of ideas. He's not looking to go toe-to-toe in a fight with the United States. He wants to use their aggression against them. After all, as accurate as American missile strikes may be, they're far from perfect. No concerted missile strikes are. Iranian civilians are already dying in blasts, images that Raisi is all too willing to use for propaganda purposes to strengthen the will of his people. Raisi also has China and Russia on his side, albeit not directly. China in particular is heavily dependent on the Strait of Hormuz for many of its goods. Though it won't pick a fight with the United States, Beijing has already started placing pressure on Washington to find a peaceful solution. Russia is also calling for restraint, arguing that an entire country shouldn't be punished for the actions of radicals. Raisi also benefits from both China and Russia having veto power as members of the United Nations or UN Security Council. Both use their vetoes, preventing the United States from obtaining global political legitimacy for the war via the UN. All of the while, Iran is spreading more chaos throughout the Middle East through its proxies. Hamas and Hezbollah maintain their focus on Israel, while the Houthis in Yemen grow ever bolder in their attacks on the Red Sea. The US has to divert at least some of its naval forces to that area. Though that won't be enough to substantially weaken its presence in the Persian Gulf, it allows Raisi to cast the United States as the controlling influence over the Middle East that he has always claimed it to be. Attacks also start occurring in the UAE and Saudi Arabia. The Houthis play a part in the attacks on the latter, with funds and equipment having already been funneled out of Iran to allow for their attacks on Saudi airports and energy plants. Raisi is gambling. If he wins, he could induce a war weariness in the United States quickly, as well as use his proxy attacks to make Saudi Arabia and the UAE withdraw their support for America. Month 2. Biden sees that the war is already at a sort of stalemate. Iran is baiting the United States to invade its mainland, an action that Biden knows is extremely risky. If the US were to throw its full force into that invasion, it's inevitable that hundreds of thousands of people, both troops and civilians, will die. He also knows that the Iranian people have been galvanized against the US due to civilians having already died in American missile strikes. Even if the US takes Iran, absorbing all of the bloodshed that would involve, he sees the potential for leaving a power vacuum. Insurgent groups would splinter off and continue fighting in the country, resulting in America potentially facing a similar situation to what it saw in Afghanistan. But still, the US can't stay in its holding pattern forever. It's holding the Persian Gulf easily and has even taken steps to reopen the Strait of Hormuz to try and keep Beijing happy. Daily missile volleys and airstrikes are being conducted on Iranian targets, slowly whittling away at the strength of Iran's war machine. But Iran won't capitulate unless it faces the full power of an American invasion. And while the US holds the Persian Gulf, Iran's proxies are conducting terror attacks throughout Europe and Africa. If the situation isn't resolved soon, the US may have a global conflict on its hands, with other nations looking to it to help them fight against Iran-backed insurgents on their territory, spreading the country's resources even thinner. Iran is also making America's naval and air assaults costly. The country is more than capable of sinking ships using missiles fired from the mainland, with the US having lost over a dozen since it took control of the Persian Gulf. Biden is left with a choice. Does he listen to the many voices in the United States that are screaming for revenge following the terror attacks that engulfed the nation just 2 months before? If he does, that would mean committing well over 1 million soldiers to a ground invasion, almost 10 times that needed for the war in Iraq, and absorbing massive military costs. And even if the US wins that ground war, it would have to commit even more resources to controlling Iran. Or does he open a channel of communication with Raisi, which is something the US hasn't really had for years given its lack of physical embassy inside Iran, to negotiate the end of the war? That could result in his own people seeing him as weak, even given the attacks he's already launched on Iran, but it could also save the lives of hundreds of thousands of people. Month 3. Biden chooses the middle ground. America begins funneling troops into Iran via the southwest, with air support provided by its fighters and helicopters, enabling landings even amidst Iran's anti-air and anti-ship defenses. But at the same time, he opens communication with Raisi. He calls Raisi's bluff. Biden tells Raisi as much during their conversations, pointing out that the ground war will be more costly to Iran than the US. He lays everything out. Yes, the United States will lose troops and equipment in the fighting, but Iran will lose more. Slowly but surely, the United States will whittle away at Iran, taking cities and working its way to Tehran, where it will ultimately depose Raisi. Is that what he wants? Raisi had hoped for a conversation, but he believed it would be a one or the other situation. Even as he speaks with Biden, American troops are fighting their way further inland. His only option now, both to preserve Iran and maintain his leadership, is to compromise. He argues for the United States to re-enter the Iran nuclear deal, something that 72% of Americans supported before his country's attacks. He also tells Biden that he should cease America's support for Israel, leaving the country defend for itself against Iran's proxies. Biden is prepared to do the former, but won't do the latter. Israel has long been an ally of the United States, but he can encourage Israel to come to the table and potentially negotiate a ceasefire of its own. He also tells Raisi that his proxies need to stop attacking commercial vessels in the Red Sea and that the Strait of Hormuz needs to be reopened for business. He also seeks promises. If Israel is to come to the negotiating table, Iran needs to approach the discussions without threats of fighting. Plus, American troops need to be guaranteed safe passage back out of Iran. Just one attack will be enough of a spark to reignite the conflict. Diplomacy has to win the day. Raisi contemplates his options and ultimately accepts Biden's proposal. The conflict isn't over, as relations with Iran are still in the balance. But Biden is at least able to start withdrawing American troops from Iran and has avoided getting the country sucked back into a Middle Eastern crisis that it's already too war-weary to control. Still, this is just one of the many ways that a war between the United States and Iran could go. And frankly, this may be the most optimistic of the scenarios available, especially when compared to the violence and bloodshed that would erupt from a full ground invasion. But what do you think? How would the war play out differently if the US committed to a ground-based assault? Could America take Iran and keep control of it? Or would a country that's been described as a fortress draw out the conflict until the United States withdrew? Tell us what you think in the comments section. Now go and check out how the US will start a war with Iran for attacking Israel, or click this other video instead.